Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Avian Knives Topaza, a super thin and super lightweight premium EDC knife. I've had this for a long time. I'm super late on the review, but I'm happy to say that this knife is still available, at least at the time of this recording. I will link it down in the description so you guys can check it out. Thanks so much to Avian Knives for sending this sample in for review, and thanks to my patrons for supporting me. I am traditionally not a fan, like personally, right? It's all preference. I'm not a fan of like super duper lightweight and super thin knives. I think mostly because I don't gain, like personally, I don't gain an enormous benefit from it. And I get a lot of satisfaction from larger knives, but these are incredibly beneficial for some people. Some people will only carry lightweight pocket knives. Some people are legitimately trying to min-max their weight to utility ratio, depending on what it is you're doing. And so there are plenty of people out there who will definitely benefit from this, specifically people who are looking for that element and want a premium knife, because that's what you're looking at. And believe me, it does come with a premium price tag. Let's go ahead and get a measurement, and then we'll talk more about it. Overall length of this guy is coming in 7.5 inches. Blade length is, I'm going to say, about 3.3. Cutting edge is about 3 inches on the dot. How about some size comparisons? Any custom scales you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and others. So up against the 80-10 and the 80-20.5. Almost exactly the same overall length as the 80-20.5, but substantially thinner. Just more compact in every dimension. Let's go ahead and put it up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3. Again, much closer to the smaller one here, but with more cutting edge. Quite a bit more than the PM2. Just much smaller. And then finally, we'll put it up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. There aren't many knives out there that would make the Hogue Deca or like the Benchmade Bug Out feel huge, but this makes the this makes the Bug Out and the Deca feel huge, right? Even if we were looking at the version of the Bug Out with the injection mold scales, or whatever they call that stuff, that wicker, it would still feel larger. So an interesting element of this knife is that it is small and thin, but it still feels more solid than you would expect for a knife of this size and weight. How's the action on this knife? You know what? I gotta be honest. I'm trying to be fair, but truthfully, the action is far more impressive than I thought it would be. I don't love it, and my the part of me that doesn't love it is purely based on the fact that it is thin, right? So really, if I'm just focusing on the parameters, right? I'm trying to be fair here. They're working within specific parameters. So when you make everything thinner, a lot of edges are going to be sharper by default, and they really did a good job of knocking things down and trying not to make any edge too sharp, right? It's kind of a tricky thing to do, I would imagine, when everything is so thin, right? So truthfully, the flipping action is pretty good. The detent strength, I mean, here, it's, it's pretty good. You can also use this little area right here to reverse flick it. If you miss the flipper tab like I did on the way down, then the blade's going to come down on you, but there's not enough weight in the blade for it to do much damage to your fingernail. Here, stopping it with the flipper tab, I would call this double clutch. So the only way to avoid that, if you're going to do a one-handed disengagement, is to allow it to clear your finger, but sometimes it'll come down directly on your skin right here. So you just have to kind of be careful. In here, they have allowed as much room as they could. Because everything is so thin, I don't know how they would get around these areas being sharp. They are, and that's something that I generally criticize, but I do that with sort of a, hey, you had an opportunity to do it better and you didn't kind of attitude. Here, they did it, but I'm not sure they had much of an opportunity to make it better. I mean, for what it is, it's pretty good. Like, yeah, it is a narrow space, and yeah, it is a little bit sharp. The lock bar tension is not insane. It's enough to lock the blade out, right? But it's not like I'm fighting it and it's digging into my skin too bad. So all things considered, yeah, right. I think it's pretty good. The action is for something like this. I think the action is actually not just fine. I think it's good. But just know it's very narrow, right? The flipper tab is going to feel pokey, and the lock bar is going to feel a little bit sharp. That's just kind of how it is. Let's do carry profile. Thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. This is thin. This is ridiculously thin. It is easily one of the thinnest knives that I have ever reviewed. Length and height up against the PM2 and Para 3. Obviously, this is going to be an unbelievably lightweight and compact object, right? In and out of the pocket, I mean, yeah, it's so thin and so lightweight that I legitimately forgot it was there multiple times, even over just a 2-day period carrying this thing. The pocket clip is pinchy, right? It just is. There's a lot of tension. It's a shorter clip. You'd think that my ability to point this out on this knife would have led to a better clip design on my own knife. Well, man, what a funny world, it is. The world of designing a pocket knife and having it created, and what you truly believe is optimal, and then you get it. And I have a lot of respect for people who understand knife design, which is most people who are making and selling knives. I have a lot of respect for people who design knives, because it really is hard. It really is hard to design something and make sure that it works, right? Sometimes you convince yourself that something is okay, and then with practice, it turns out to not be okay. So ironically, in this case, I'm able to identify a pinchy clip, but for some reason, I wasn't able to do that with my own knife design. So it is, but it's also something that is totally survivable. Some people are going to be really bothered by it, and other people might not, but I figured I would point it out. Anyways, let's weigh it. What were we talking about? Weight? Yeah, so this is titanium and MagnaCut. What's the HRC in the MagnaCut? According to their website, it's 62 to 63, which I think is just fine. The weight is coming in at 1.7 ounces. I think on the website they list it as 1.6. That doesn't matter to me. This is so far under what I consider to be ultra lightweight. It's just ridiculous. I mean, this is insanely lightweight. I don't know that I don't know what blades I've experienced that it's this much cutting edge to this light of weight. Like, the ratio is an extreme for this channel, which is crazy considering I have about 4,600 uploads. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen this before. Maybe with one of Avian's other products, maybe 1 or 2 maximum other knives have been the same or close. Not a common thing. So that's pretty wild. Obviously, they accomplished this with an insane amount of milling. It's not just on the outside, but the inside. There's even milling on the underside of this. It is ridiculous. They did as much as they possibly could without killing the structural integrity of this thing, or killing what is possible in terms of ergonomic comfort. So, again, it's not my thing, but is it impressive? Oh yeah, it's really impressive. I'm shocked that they managed to do this. Let's go ahead and measure the blade stock thickness. This is a thin blade. It will definitely be a slicing machine, and it is also very thin behind the edge. The actual blade stock is 85 thousandths. Very thin. Obviously not a hard use knife. This is a use it for simple cutting tasks, light cutting tasks, and cut for a long time type of knife, right? Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. I'll get out my tools as per usual. My tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use on this channel. Almost certainly a T8, but I'm questioning whether or not that is, it's so hard to see. Is it T8? Yeah, it's T8. Okay. So the pivot is a T8, thank goodness, captive back end there. And then we actually have T8. So the fact that this knife is utilizing T8 screws, I have no patience for companies who willingly choose T6 screws. Somebody has tossed the argument at me that T6 are smaller, and it creates opportunities for the design to not be focusing on the size of the hardware. Like, T8 screws are too big and they create distractions from the design. I think that is incorrect. If the Avian knife can use T8 screws, everything should, right? But maybe some designers and companies just don't care. I mean, the truth is, as long as you have the right tools, you should be okay. T6 just seems to be easier to strip. But the fact that it's a simple frame lock, it does utilize bearings. Lock bar insert screw is going to be smaller, but you don't need to take that out. It's literally just 3 screws and you're in. It's super simple. Nick Shabazz has a video where he disassembled this, so you can check that out if you want to. But yeah, incredibly simple. So let's go ahead and move into the meat and potatoes here. Ergonomically, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's not contoured, which would have been nice, but I'm not sure that legitimately would have done much, right? They would have added a little bit of weight and it made it slightly more comfortable, but it's this area right here that creates this little kind of shelf, and that's where you're really going to notice it. So it's almost, to be even remotely comfortable in this knife, or for it to feel like natural or organic, you kind of have to be choked up. This position back here is not comfortable. Again, I'm being honest, but at the same time, it's like clearly their goal here was to make it thin and lightweight. So the parameters for comfort are so narrow. What could they have done? I mean, the pocket clip sticks up and I feel it, but it's because the rest of the knife is so thin. So considering what they had to work with, the room that they had to work with, they still managed to make a shape that will go in your hand and do what it's supposed to do. The likeliness of having to squeeze this knife and bear down on it during a cutting task is very low. And honestly, this should not be used for hard cutting tasks. It's just not made that way. Most of the time, you're going to be doing really, really lightweight cutting tasks that won't require you to squeeze the knife, and therefore won't put you in a position where there's so much, not pain, but like you're not feeling so negatively impacted by the lack of comfort on the knife. So yeah, just trying to be fair there. It's not comfortable, but I don't know how they could have made it more comfortable. Holding it the way that I would assume that you would cut or would hold a knife, like this, using it for tasks that I would assume you would use it for, like me just opening packages and just using it for little things here and there. Yeah, because I wasn't really ever doing this. I was just holding it like this. So truthfully, it was fine. I mean, I'm just a little bit different set of rules for something like this. It is kind of neat that it looks like, like a skyscraper being constructed. That's kind of what it looks like to me. All these little triangles in here. I wonder if they milled the shapes like this because it makes it stronger. I just remember those classes that I took in like middle school where you're supposed to build a bridge with these flimsy sticks. And, they gave us a hint like, hey, triangles are really strong, And that turned out to be true. I don't know if that's the case or if they just chose a theme and they stuck with it, but it is cool and it's very intricate. If you look at all the little details and the different, heights, and they're not really layers. It's all the same piece of titanium, but you kind of have this base level and then there's like a step here and another step, right? Around the pivot, pretty cool. I think this would look awesome and be a lot more appealing to a lot more people. I don't have a problem with the gray, but you've got an opportunity here for some pretty interesting anodizing because you have different areas, right? So you can make it look like there's another piece of titanium underneath by anodizing this area and then anodizing the step something different and then anodizing these areas underneath yet something else, right? I think there's a good opportunity there. Something that I saw with the Aviator Bifrost that they did. Obviously, it's a much more complicated knife, but really cool. And it added that three-dimensional depth that I think you don't get as much with something like this. But it might also add to cost, so I can understand why they didn't do it. It's still cool without it. The blade is pretty straightforward. You have this opening hole here, which again, I'm really impressed they even left enough room or had enough room to allow you to do a pretty comfortable reverse flick. I mean, this is probably how, if I carried this long term, this is how I would deploy it. I found myself kind of doing both without thinking about it, but I think this is how I would default to it. The edge is ridiculously thin. I mean, you feel it and you're like, oh, relative to this area, it feels like it doesn't drop very much, but it does end up getting super thin and it does go through material really, really easily. The edge is nice too. These are manufactured by Bestech. I can't remember if I said that or not, but Bestech is a good OEM and they did a really good job with this. There's really not a whole lot to say. The blade finish is pretty basic, but it's fine. It looks good. There's no mounting position for the pocket clip for righties. At least when they sent this to me, they sent it in a Civivi pouch because it was a pre-production sample. So if this does come with a second clip that is curved so that lefties can attach it, I don't know, but I doubt it. And here's why. Because the clip nests into the frame and there's no spot for that to occur for the other side. So it's probably just like this, and that's that. Simple standoff, which makes sense if you're trying to achieve the goal of making the load as light as possible. Can you bend the frame? Yeah, but it still feels pretty rigid. I mean, there's no surprise there. Again, this isn't really made as like a hardcore sort of knife, right? The stop pin is located internally right there. Actually, a pretty traditional spot. There's some pretty deep shouldering. Somehow they managed to allow for completely and totally solid lockup. There's no lock stick. There's no pivot lash. Very smooth and consistent in here. And like I said, just a pretty impressive detent, right? Yeah, really cool. I think it looks like maybe it's favoring slightly to the left, and it's possible that it's done that from me flipping it out and carrying and using it or whatever. I would imagine that tightening the pivot down might correct that, but most of the time, Bestech is really good about making sure blades are centered, so I would assume that will be the case. And again, this was a pre-production sample, so maybe it was just something to do with that. But overall, it is a cool knife, and it's accomplishing things that maybe not a lot of people are asking for, but then again, like tons of stuff in the knife world does that. So it is cool. It's very impressive that they managed to do this. And for some people, this is going to be exactly what they're looking for. I would imagine very few people, but then again, I imagine that it was marketed to very few people. This isn't a knife for me, but it doesn't mean that it's not for somebody, right? It's very expensive at $300. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I know from talking with many people who have used Bestech and many other Chinese OEMs for their projects, Bestech takes a pretty serious cut. So it's not leaving an enormous... Number one, it's already, even with this being manufactured in China, like people are going to look at this and go, it's so lightweight, it's so thin, it's so small. Something that are those three things, regardless of what it's made out of, cannot cost that much money. And that's wrong. It can, and it can still be very expensive to do. There's actually pretty extensive machining on this. The tolerances are super, super tight, and you're working with materials like MagnaCut and titanium, right? It's just expensive to do. Bestech has to take a cut, and then Avian has to take a cut. And let me tell you, there's not a lot of room left over. So on one hand, it's like, geez, that's a lot of money. $300 will get you a really cool pocket knife nowadays. But then again, this is unique. It's not going to be worth it to everybody, but for some people, it will. Do I recommend it? If you are looking specifically for this, this is about as good. If somebody said, here's what I'm trying to do, right? And they explained this without showing me a picture of it or a physical sample, I would say, wow, good luck. I can't imagine you're going to actually make something that ends up being comfortable or usable. But if they handed me this, I would be like, oh my gosh, well, this exceeds all of my expectations. It's still not for me, but it's pretty impressive. So yeah, if you are looking for a ridiculously lightweight premium cutting tool that far exceeds acceptable ratios of blade and weight, right? I mean, here it is. I don't know that you'll be able to find better if you are specifically looking for this package with titanium and MagnaCut. I just don't know how many people out there specifically want that. So for those people, yes. For literally everybody else, probably not. You have way too many choices. Pretty cool though. Definitely impressive. That's all I have to say about it. Thanks again to Avian Knives. I don't get to keep this. This will go back to them. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.